Hey everyone, happy holidays to all our listeners out there. I hope you are ready for a little pre-Christmas deep dive with us.
Yeah.
Today, we're going to be looking at how interpretations of the Bible,
Okay.
particularly in Christianity, might have led to some practices and beliefs that might surprise you.
Interesting.
So it's going to be pretty interesting.
I'm excited.
Yeah, so if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. You know how we do it here.
Yeah.
We like to do these deep dives.
Right.
And today's source material is really interesting. It's a chapter called The Egoistic Interpreters of Scriptures, How False Prophets Subverted Christian Faith.
Wow.
And
Mouthful.
yeah, it's a long one, but it's from a text called Pasted Text.
Okay.
And basically, the chapter dives into what the author calls superstitions that stemmed from interpretations of the Bible,
Interesting.
and how those interpretations were sometimes used to promote alcohol consumption, even with its potential downsides.
I see.
So, like I said, this is
Yeah.
going to be a fascinating one.
Yeah. I mean, it's always so interesting to see how subjective interpretations can be.
Yeah,
Like,
Yeah.
we're often taught to think of them as being so straightforward,
yeah,
but there's a real human element at play.
absolutely. And that's exactly what we're going to try to unpack today.
Yeah.
So the source is definitely coming at this from a critical angle,
Right.
especially when it comes to the scientific basis or lack thereof for these beliefs. And it's suggesting that, certain interpretations were perhaps used to maintain control within religious institutions.
Makes sense.
All right, so let's dive into this whole alcohol thing first, because I have to admit, I was surprised to learn that the Bible actually references alcohol in both positive and negative ways.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
It's not as simple as you might think.
yeah,
Take, for example, the story of Jesus turning water into wine
right,
at the wedding in Cana.
yes.
So for those unfamiliar, this is a key moment in the Gospels where Jesus performs his first public miracle.
Yeah.
And the source points out that, this event is often used to illustrate Jesus's acceptance of celebration and enjoyment.
Right, but then you also have those passages in Ephesians that caution against drunkenness.
Uh-huh.
So how did these seemingly conflicting views play out in interpretations?
It is interesting, isn't it?
Yeah. The source seems to suggest there was some deliberate manipulation going on.
Well, yeah.
What's the evidence for that?
The source argues that certain interpreters really emphasize those positive mentions of alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah. Using them to justify its use while downplaying the warnings.
Yeah,
It's like they were cherry picking
right.
the parts that fit a specific agenda.
Yeah. It's almost as if each era reinterprets scripture to fit its own anxieties, you know?
For sure.
So in a society where alcohol consumption was prevalent, those positive interpretations could have been used to maintain the status quo.
Exactly. And, if we consider the wider historical context, this had some significant ramifications.
Okay.
The source highlights the rise of the alcohol industry during this period.
Right.
It even suggests that, some within the industry might have leveraged these favorable interpretations to market their products, fueling the very problems that the Bible warned against.
It makes you wonder how deeply intertwined religion and commerce have always been,
Yeah.
and how interpretations can be used to justify all sorts of things.
Right.
But the source isn't just focused on alcohol, is it?
Right.
There's this whole concept of what they call superstitions. So can we break down what the source actually means by that term?
Okay, sure. So the source uses superstition to refer to beliefs or practices that lack a solid foundation in evidence or reason.
I see.
It's not necessarily about the practices themselves, but the rigid, almost dogmatic
Yeah.
way they're interpreted. The source seems to be suggesting that these interpretations might have been used to reinforce the authority of those in power,
Right.
rather than promote genuine understanding or spiritual growth.
Okay, so it's less about the content of the belief and more about the context in which it's presented.
Yeah, I think so.
And the source argues that there's a pattern of this happening across different interpretations.
That seems to be the case. Yeah.
Okay.
They point to a whole range of examples, from the way religious titles and hierarchies are interpreted to the emphasis placed on specific clothing or rituals.
Okay. So let's look at those more closely.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
Okay. All right. So let's unpack some of these examples the source gives us.
Okay.
They talk about religious titles and hierarchies,
Right.
and suggesting that the idea of certain individuals having inherent spiritual authority just by holding a title lacks a scientific basis. What's their critique there?
Well, the source seems to be questioning the idea that spiritual authority can be passed down like through a lineage conferred by an institution.
I see.
They point out that there's no, empirical evidence to suggest that someone's position in a religious hierarchy automatically makes them more connected to the divine or grants them special powers.
It's almost like the source is pushing back against this idea of blind faith in authority.
Yeah?
Encouraging people to think for themselves instead of just accepting what they're told.
Right.
But it goes beyond just titles. Right?
Yeah.
They also talk about things like clothing and rituals.
That's right.
Okay.
The source highlights the significance placed on certain clothing items and symbols.
Yeah.
The idea that wearing or displaying them is necessary for divine favor or protection. They argue this is more about symbolism and outward displays of piety than any actual spiritual benefit.
That reminds me of a tradition in my family. We always have this specific ornament on our Christmas tree.
Right.
It's been passed down for generations. And there's this whole story about how it brings good luck.
Right.
But honestly, I have no idea where that story came from or if there's any truth to it. It's just something we've always done.
I think that's a perfect example of how these beliefs can become ingrained in culture and tradition.
Yeah.
We inherit them without necessarily questioning their origins or validity.
Yeah.
And that's what the source seems to be challenging.
So it's not necessarily about dismissing these practices altogether, but rather understanding the context in which they arose and being aware of the potential for them to be used to control or manipulate.
Exactly. It's about discerning whether these interpretations are truly serving our spiritual well-being or simply reinforcing existing power structures.
And the source doesn't stop at clothing and symbols.
Right.
They also delve into rituals and ceremonies.
Yeah.
What's their take on those?
So the source suggests that the strict adherence to specific rituals and ceremonies, often with the belief that any deviation will lead to negative consequences, falls into the category of superstition.
Right.
They argue that this emphasis on outward form over inner substance can distract from the true essence of faith.
So it's like they're saying the meaning behind the ritual can get lost in the rigid adherence to the rules.
Exactly.
It becomes more about performing the actions correctly than engaging with the underlying spiritual principles.
Precisely. And the source implies that this focus on strict observance can create a climate of fear and guilt, where people are afraid to question or deviate from the prescribed practices.
So rather than promoting genuine spiritual growth, these interpretations might actually be hindering it by creating a sense of dependence on external authorities and rituals.
That seems to be the source's contention. Yeah.
Okay.
They're advocating for a more critical and discerning approach to religious beliefs and practices.
Yeah.
One that emphasizes personal understanding and connection with the divine over blind adherence to dogma.
Okay. It's fascinating how these seemingly disparate examples, alcohol consumption, religious titles, clothing rituals, all seem to point to this larger pattern of interpretations being used for social control.
For sure.
It's almost like the source is suggesting that by promoting very specific and rigid interpretations, those in positions of authority can maintain control over their followers.
That's a very astute observation.
Thank you.
The source definitely seems to be implying that these interpretations were used to establish a power dynamic.
Yeah.
Where obedience and conformity were paramount.
So it's not just about believing in something.
Right.
It's about believing in it the right way, according to those in power.
Right.
And any deviation from that right way is seen as a threat.
Exactly. And that right way often served to reinforce the authority of those promoting it.
Okay.
It's a classic example of how interpretations, especially when presented as the only valid option, can be used as a tool for control.
But the source uses the term false prophets to describe these interpreters.
Yeah.
Are they suggesting that these individuals were intentionally malicious or deceptive? Or could it be something more unconscious?
That's a nuanced point.
Yeah.
The source doesn't explicitly delve into their intentions.
Okay.
But it does suggest that their interpretations, whether conscious or not, serve to perpetuate their own power and influence.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that interpretations are rarely neutral.
Right.
They're always shaped by the individual or group putting them forward.
Yeah, it's almost like we need to develop this healthy skepticism
Right.
toward the interpretations we encounter, especially when they come from those in positions of authority.
I think that's a key takeaway from this whole deep dive,
Yeah.
It's not about rejecting everything outright,
Right.
but approaching these interpretations with a discerning eye.
Yeah.
Asking ourselves, does this resonate with my own understanding? Is it supported by evidence? And most importantly, is it contributing to my spiritual growth?
Yeah.
Or simply reinforcing someone else's agenda?
So how do we become more discerning? Like, how do we learn to sift through all the interpretations out there and find those that are genuinely helpful?
Well, I think it starts with awareness.
Okay.
Recognizing that interpretations exist, that they're not objective truths,
Yeah.
but rather perspectives shaped by human understanding.
Yeah.
Once we've acknowledged that,
Right.
we can start to ask more critical questions.
Like what kind of questions should we be asking ourselves?
Well, for starters, consider the source.
Yeah.
Who's presenting this interpretation?
Yeah.
What's their background and motivation? Are they trying to sell you something?
Right.
Promote a particular ideology?
It's almost like becoming an investigator looking for clues to understand the bigger picture.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then, of course, there's the evidence. What evidence do they present to support their interpretation?
Yeah.
Is it based on solid facts or just personal opinions? And are there alternative interpretations out there
Right.
that might offer a different perspective?
The source seems to place a lot of emphasis on scientific evidence.
Right.
Do you think that's always necessary?
I don't think it's necessarily about requiring scientific proof for everything,
Okay.
but rather looking for some kind of grounding in reality. Does this interpretation align with what we know about the world?
Yeah.
Or is it based on assumptions and beliefs
Right.
that might not hold up under scrutiny?
Right, because sometimes those deeply held beliefs, we have those things we've always accepted as truth.
Yeah.
They might just crumble when we really start to examine them.
And that can be uncomfortable,
Yeah.
even frightening.
Yeah.
But it's also how we grow. By challenging our assumptions and being open to new perspectives.
Yeah.
We deepen our understanding
Yeah.
and move closer to the truth.
So it's about being open-minded but not gullible.
Right.
Skeptical but not cynical. It's a delicate balance.
It is, and it requires effort.
Yeah.
We can't just passively absorb the interpretations we're given.
Right.
We have to actively engage with them,
Yeah.
question them, and ultimately decide for ourselves
Right.
what resonates with our own understanding and experience.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive.
Yeah, that's
Into interpretations and their power to shape our beliefs and actions.
for sure.
I think we've uncovered some really important insights today.
I agree.
We've learned that interpretations are not objective truths,
Right.
but rather perspectives influenced by human understanding and motivations.
Absolutely.
We've explored how these interpretations can be used sometimes intentionally, sometimes unconsciously, to promote agendas and maintain control. And we've discussed the importance of approaching interpretations with a discerning eye,
Yeah.
questioning their validity, considering alternative perspectives.
So important.
And perhaps most importantly, we've been reminded that our own interpretations, the stories we tell ourselves and the beliefs we hold dear, are also subject to these same biases and influences.
That's a good point.
It's a call to examine our own assumptions,
Yeah.
challenge our own beliefs, and be open to the possibility that we might be wrong.
That's how we learn.
So as we head into this holiday season,
Yes.
I want to leave our listeners with a little challenge.
Okay.
As you gather with loved ones, maybe over a glass of eggnog, remember our conversation about alcohol interpretations.
I will.
See if you can spot any examples of interpretations at play.
That's a good idea.
It might be a family tradition, a political debate, or even just a casual conversation.
Right.
Pay attention to how those interpretations are shaping the discussion.
Yeah.
And maybe be brave enough to ask a few questions.
It's a wonderful way to put these ideas into practice.
Yeah.
And who knows, it might even spark some interesting and enlightening conversations.
Happy holidays, deep divers. Stay curious and keep questioning.